Welcome to the program. I'm Pat Piper. On this Saturday night, we have the perfect guest, Akil Aline, who is going to talk to us about drinking. And everyone I know is probably watching and drinking right now. And Akil is with us to pursue this discussion a little bit more. For those of you who are under the age of 18, is that right, the federal law, or is it 21?
It's 21.
All right. Akil says that's nuts, and there's no reason why we should have that particular age and that particular law. You do want a minimum age, though.
I think it's fair to have a minimum drinking age, but my point here is that the federal government does not have the power to set that age under the Constitution. Now, the Constitution, I'm sure you've heard this before, lists certain powers that the federal government has and leaves all the rest to the states. Based on that, the Supreme Court has laid down a broad principle that the federal government should not be able to force the states to adopt certain policies in the areas where they're supposed to be able to run the show. Unfortunately, in 1984, the federal government passed a law that threatened to cut 5% of the highway funding to any state that failed to raise its drinking age to 21. That's the law that I think is unconstitutional.
But you don't have an age that you think it should be. You're just more ticked about it, the federal government getting involved in this, right?
That's right. It's really a state matter that the state should be able to resolve on their own.
Okay. Now, many would say this is great because it's going to keep people from drinking too much, because it's not legal to drink until you hit that particular age, right?
Wrong. I think most people know from experience, if not their own experience, then from seeing others do it, that the minimum drinking age laws don't stop people under the age of 21 from drinking. It happens anyway, and there's no evidence to suggest, believe it or not, that having the age at 21 reduces alcohol consumption or drunk driving or any of the other things that people cite to justify the law.
What is the part of the Constitution that is saying the federal government should not be doing this?
Well, the 10th Amendment says that all powers that the Constitution does not explicitly delegate to Washington are left to the states or to the people themselves. Now, regulating the age at which people can drink is part of the general police power. It has nothing to do with any of the powers that are laid out and delegated to the federal government in Article 1 of the Constitution. Therefore, according to the 10th Amendment, the states are supposed to be able to handle that. Now, when the federal government says we're going to punish the states for not governing in the way that we want them to govern, then the federal government is coercing the states in a way that it shouldn't be able to do.
But these states are taking federal dollars, so they have to play by the federal rules for the highways.
Well, here's the thing about that. If the federal government simply wanted to cut funding, highway funding or any other funding to the states for its own sake or for some other policy reason, that, in my view, would be fine. But when the federal government uses that as a means of trying to force the states to change a policy in an area where the states are supposed to be free to govern how they choose, that's a different story. Then the federal government is using that law as a way to push the states around in an area where they're supposed to be sovereign.
Is there any other law that is following the same road, excuse the word, that where the federal government is saying you can't get this unless you do this?
I'm glad you brought that up. The Obamacare law tried to do that through the Medicaid expansion. The idea was that, the federal government would force the states to expand the scope of coverage under Medicaid, and the penalty for states that didn't play along was originally supposed to be a total withdrawal of all Medicare funding. Now, in the recent Supreme Court case, the court struck down that particular part of the law. It said the federal government can't take away all of the states' Medicaid funding.
Under all states get money from the federal government for roads, correct?
Yes.
And maybe that we can argue that's our tax dollars or whatever, but we rely on federal dollars for roads. What's wrong with trying to have roads as safe as possible?
There's nothing wrong with trying to keep the roads safe, but in this case, the law in question was not closely tied enough to that goal. It was more about regulating and policing people's behavior. Now, we can have a debate about whether any level of government should be doing that, but the Constitution makes it pretty clear that the federal government does not have the authority to do that.
Okay. Now, let's give an example. State of Michigan, I believe the drinking age is 18. Are they not getting federal dollars?
Well, all 50 states, including Michigan, of course, have their drinking ages set at 21. Now, in the 1980s, the state of South Dakota sued the federal government to try to get the law overturned, and the Supreme Court upheld the law. It said that because only 5% of highway funding was being cut, that was not coercion. It was not a serious enough penalty for that to count as a federal coercion of the states. I think that was the wrong way for the court to rule. I mean, if 5% wasn't a big enough cut, then what percentage would have been big enough? 10%, 15%? The court never said. And it can't say. There's no way to draw that line that would not be arbitrary. It would have made more sense for the court to say, anytime the federal government tries to punish a state to any extent for not dancing to its tune in an area where the states are supposed to be sovereign, that is coercion and it is unconstitutional.
Are you confident that your plan is going to see the light of day?
Confident is not the word I would use. I don't know how soon, if ever, this idea will catch on in the judiciary. But look, sometimes these ideas take a long time to take root and to come to fruition. I mean, look how long the people who supported healthcare reform, government-centric healthcare reform, had to wait to get as far as Obamacare. And even that fell short of what they wanted. Teddy Roosevelt tried that 100 years ago. That's the way it works in a democracy. You have an idea that you want to put out there, and you want the powers that be to adopt that idea. And initially, they'll always be resistant. I may not live to see the Supreme Court, come to its senses on this matter. But even if I don't live to see it, maybe some people who are younger than me will one day see it.
Akil Aline is the guest. We thank him for making a return visit. And 100 years from now, we'll be right here talking about the same thing. Thanks for watching. I'm Pat Piper. See you tomorrow night.